Thank you. Can I just, this is a comment as opposed to a question. Dr. Alec, you made the point about internal reports not being made public. I just wish to make the comment that if CASA had made this report available to ATSB in an open and transparent manner as required by the MOU, the report wouldn't have been made public. ATSB probably would have included some facts that CASA had recognised that they were deficient in some areas, and the report does, despite your comments, recognise that areas of the oversight were in fact deficient, not just not desirable. But that wouldn't have necessarily been made public, but it would have informed the report in terms of an approach to aviation safety that would give us a good basis going forward. The second point, Mr McCormack, is that you pleaded the case that CASA can't do everything. You can't police every corner. I accept that. I understand that departments are resource constrained. But two issues. One, part of the purpose of a safety investigation is to say, is the resourcing adequate? And if it's not, for the government to then be required to respond to a recommendation out of an ATSB report that perhaps more resources are required in an area. So to just not disclose that is not actually an adequate answer. But secondly, in terms of things like FRMS, the work had already been done by CASA in terms of the work by two officers of CASA. And secondly, my understanding from the documents is that you had peer review and comment from organisations such as the CAA that gave a very clear indication that using a more advanced fatigue management system, that the flight that was undertaken would not have been approved under an FAA-endorsed fatigue management system. Now, that requires no additional effort, minimal additional resource on behalf of CASA, except perhaps an email to advise the ATSB that fatigue was probably a causal factor in why the error was made by the pilot. And yet that was not disclosed, as the MOU clearly indicates it should have been.
Well, Senator, if I could just go through those backwards, I guess. As far as the ATSB investigating fatigue, the ATSB does address fatigue in their report and was addressing fatigue. As far as the, and I think you don't mean the FAA with that system. I think you mean the UK CAA on
Correct.
the other numerical system. Numerical systems, to say one is operationally validated, what does that mean? As far as I know, the only research that's been done on long-haul operations or night operations, back-of-the-clock circadian dysrhythmia, was done by Dr. Curtis Graber back at the turn of the century with Northwest Airlines, and on flights between Hawaii, Tokyo and Minneapolis and Paul. To put one system forward and say, oh, even internally from CASA, oh, that system that they're using, this FADE system, that's no good. We've got a better one here. We should have followed this. If you look at the UK CAA system, and then you have to compare that, the one that Mr Cook has put forward as being the answer, if you look at the UK CAA publication, the CAP 371 edition 2, you will find that some of that information does not currently appear in their documentation. As far as development of fatigue risk management guidelines go, there is a great deal done about fatigue risk management. As I said, ICAO are already doing this. Some years ago, myself, in my previous iteration, I was on ICAO working group looking at fatigue risk management and how we manage those issues. That's an entire body of discussion, which I'm quite happy to have. However, I again would say, Chair, it will take a considerable amount of time to go through everything, but I'm quite happy to do that. We're at your mercy. If you look to whether the situation in CASA now, whether we had the resources and whether we did not, through 2009, 2010 and continuing to this day, an overhaul of CASA and the way we operate, the way we are structured, how we go about our surveillance, where we do surveillance and when we do it, and what systems we have to support it, has been an ongoing issue for myself and my team. We are deeply involved in reorganising CASA, and we have been, as I say, since I arrived. As for the resources, what we did go forward out of the Chamber's report, which again I will say is an internal report to CASA, whether the ATSB would have changed their opinion of fatigue, and they have fatigue management experts as well as we do, that is a matter to ask for the ATSB. We did look at our structure, we did look at where we needed to go forward and changes we wish to make, and we approached the government and said, we need to get this onto a long-term funding strategy. We put forward a new policy proposal, an MPP, to increase our numbers, which the government also supported, and we had, from memory, $89.9 million of long-term funding, which we are still under, and we had an increase in headcount to which we continue to recruit. However, the NPP numbers that we put forward, again agreed by the government, and I don't think anyone opposed it, We have fulfilled those positions, and we're continuing to develop the way we go forward and what we do. To turn around in fatigue risk in particular and say, I have found the answer, here is the panacea, I have it here now, and it's a system that works like this, and that's what the UK use, I think that is a step way too far. And anyone who is actually versed in that, in fatigue risk management, not just human factors, would find that anathema to where the research is going.
And Mr.
CASA
McCormack,
continues to oversight as best we can with our resources. Our priorities, as have been given by successive governments of whatever colour, have been that we should give priority to fare-paying passengers, the travelling public. We do that. We discharge our duties under Section 3 of the Civil Aviation Act and under Section 9 where it expands on our individual priorities. Since that time, and continuing to this day, we surveil organisations at a much greater depth than we ever had before. But there's only so much we can do, as I think the committee is quite happy to acknowledge. We have seen issues where we have seen organisations heading in a direction where we could not ostensibly pull them out of what, to use an aviation analogy, as a nosedive, or where they did not want to work with us, or they were not cognizant of their safety responsibilities. We've taken action. We've taken action with Tiger Airways, we've taken action with Barrier Aviation, and there are a number of other aviation companies at the moment we're involved with. It's not because we're out there kicking heads, if I could use that vernacular. We're out there saying, hey, here's what the regs say. Okay, you say you haven't been here for a very long time and we're doing this. We have to strike this balance. We have to say, well, you've got to step up to this, the same as we have. Do we need to review our regulations? Yes. We've produced more in our CASR review of the parts, as you're most probably aware, than we in the last 3 or 4 years than we have in the previous considerable number of years. I'll leave it at that without being too specific. Evidenced also by we've now completed the aviation licensing regulations for pilots, the flying training schools, Part 141, 42, they were signed by the Governor-General this week. We're moving forward. We're not static. To look back and say to us, oh, back then you should have said something. We did. We said it to the government, and the government listened, and the government funded us, and we're still funded to that situation now, and I thank them for it. And if I could go so far as to say, if anyone else had been the government of the day, I think our issues would have been favourably received.
McCormack.